Hello there, and a warm welcome to our webinar on Process Model Begin with Basics. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be joining us today. I hope you're all healthy and safe, and that you're in the mood to learn about the basics of Process Model. By now, you should be able to see slides on the screen and my video. My name is Jennifer Loughridge, and I'm the Principal Consultant from Loughridge Transformations. So here's the burning question that we will be looking at today. Is your organisation leaving value on the table by not leveraging a process model? Well, in this webinar, you will learn what are the 7 must-do items in process model deployment, why mindset is a game changer, and how to realise those process model benefits fast. So let's have a look what we're going to be covering off today. In a moment, we'll introduce ourselves a little bit more, and then we're going to have a look at why a process model is an enabler for performance and for transformation. We'll take you through the 7 must-do items to help you deliver a fit-for-purpose change that will realise benefits early. And then we'll wrap up and we'll move on to the Q&A. So all our speakers today, they're from Loughridge Transformations, and we're a boutique consulting firm. We specialise in delivering functional improvements and transformation, which positively impact the bottom line and organisational culture. As I said, my name's Jennifer Loughridge, and I'm the Principal Consultant at Loughridge Transformations. I'm a finance professional by background, but I specialise in finance transformation and continuous improvement, and that's really been my passion for the last few years. Woon-Hui is one of our senior consultants at Loughridge Transformations, and we've worked together over many years and had fun doing so. We've enjoyed both large and smaller scale programs. Given her extensive transformation program management experience, she keeps the rest of us right on all the project and program management topics. And in addition, she's got deep process expertise, particularly in the offer to cash area. Hans is also a senior consultant at Loughridge Transformations, and we've also, not to give our ages away, worked together for many years. He's a real guru when it comes to finance systems, and he's our go-to person for topics on process, data, and technology. And he spent a great deal of time in the world of Lean Six Sigma, so he has a lot of energy when it comes to process performance and process improvement. We've put our email details here, and we'd love you to get in touch if you have a question following the webinar or you just want to explore a topic further. All right, so the question I posed at the beginning of the webinar was, is your organisation leaving value on the table by not leveraging a process model? So let's start with thinking about this through the lens of transformation. And on the screen now, we have some views from Gartner and from McKinsey. They're pretty clear that solid process management is the foundation for transformation, which is essentially about ensuring competitiveness. And I have to say, in my experience, both in the corporate world and as a consultant, organisations often try to run before they can walk, especially when implementing technology as part of the transformation. However, let's say your organisation isn't thinking about transformation, at least not yet. What's in it for you then? Well, if you're not thinking about transformation so far, a process model is still a massive enabler to business success. But let's wind back a bit. Why is it such a fundamental enabler? Well, if you need to convince the skeptics in your organisation, and there usually are a few, this is also a great way of stating your case for change. Each element here, it's about creating value and enhancing competitiveness for your organisation. So why is it a win for your organisation? Well, there's a familiar saying that you can't manage what you don't measure. And I would suggest if it's not visible, you're not getting far with measurement alone. Performance visibility is important because it's about each person in the chain knowing their contribution to delivering the organisation's outcomes. As for the rest, which organisation doesn't like improved delivery times, fewer mess ups, smoother handovers, and outcome-oriented work. Of course, it's all very easy to say, but it's actually a process model which will deliver this. But what about the individual members of the organisation? What's in it for them? Well, they'll feel more valued and be less frustrated. Time is freed up for more value-adding and rewarding activities. Increased engagement and collaboration can be so critical in these virtual and hybrid working times. And at the end of the day, improved culture with gains in efficiency, effectiveness, and control, it's all pretty compelling stuff. So where do you start? Well, this isn't about one size fits all. You really need to work out what suits your organisation so you can get the benefits flowing from that as soon as possible. And if you've worked with Loughridge transformations before, you might recognise our 4 elements of transformation model. It's fundamentally at the heart of what we do when we're problem solving, identifying improvements, or working on transformation. And you'll see there that process is right there as the first element. Data, of course, goes right with that, and we'll come on to that later on in the webinar. First off, you really need to work out where is your organisation today. And to help you do that, we've got 7 must-do questions you can ask yourself. That's the ultimate in keep it simple. If you're dealing with things on a larger scale, you'll probably want to do something more thorough than that. Next, think about the mindset. So this is not just about technical nuts and bolts. If you're not sure what I mean about mindset, we'll hold that thought because we'll come on to leadership behaviours that help create the culture and mindset you need in a moment. Lastly, you work out where you want to be. Now, none of this is rocket science, of course, but it is important to ask yourself, do I have the right process expertise? But also, do I have the right project and change experience in getting this to work? After all, we've probably all experienced situations where processes are in place, but in reality, what do you have? Some online folders with outdated process flowcharts. Nobody keeps them alive or even references. Maybe not everybody in your organisation even knows they exist. That's no use to anybody. But how does that come about? Well, it usually comes down to how it's been implemented. If these are the gaps in your organisation's capabilities, and let's remember Gartner on our earlier slide suggests that only 25% of organisations do have those capabilities, you might want to consider supplementing your in-house team with some experienced consultants like us. We live and breathe this stuff, and we're passionate about getting others on board with our process mantra. So why am I passionate about it? Is because I've seen that it works. I've seen the results, and I know that it's not about rendering an organisation inflexible or lacking in agility. So if you are looking for something more sophisticated because your scale and complexity, they demand it, I really don't think you can go wrong with Gartner. Gartner set the standard for assessing the maturity of processes and data within organizations. And even though they created their original process assessment more than 10 years ago, it undoubtedly remains valid. Their data model is a bit more recent addition, but it works on the same principle and it's equally well regarded. At one end of the scale, you can actually bring Gartner in to do a complete assessment on your behalf. It's also possible just to buy access to their documentation and perform the assessments yourself. So at one end of the scale, facilitate an internal assessment based on your own knowledge and your analytics. Whatever level you choose, you can really do this with or without external support from consultants. That depends on your organization's resource level and capability. Again, thinking about complexity and size of your organization and its ultimate aims. Whatever way you choose to go about it, your goal is to ascertain the maturity level for both process and data within your organization. All right, so we've talked a bit on why it's so important, but let's go right back to basics. Are we all clear on what a process actually is? At its essence, a process is a series of steps and activities, including people, materials, information, and equipment designed to bring a product or service to the customer. And we've illustrated here at the top some activities that you could find in an organisation. Probably different departments are responsible for those activities. People will be executing the activities the best way they can, perhaps in the same way as their neighbour, but perhaps differently. Then below, we've put those exact same activities and shown it as a process. So what happens to customer satisfaction when all of these departments, like at the top, work independently? And then what happens when people work at the bottom, then in an end-to-end process? I think it goes without saying which scenario will give rise to the highest customer satisfaction. Right, now we know what the basics of a process is, the next question inevitably is, what does good look like? Well, a good process is a perfect process. And while we're talking about this, why don't you think of a process for which you're accountable or in which you play a significant part? As we go through this, have a think about just how P-E-R-F-E-C-T, perfect, your process is. So P stands for predictable. You want to know what you get, not be taking a gamble. That means that every possible outcome of the process should be anticipated and at least minimally prepared for, so that your performance is predictable with minimal variation. E stands for effective. A good process should deliver the outputs desired by the customer in the correct quantity, quality, and timescales. R stands for repeatable. You want to be able to deliver this time and time again. F stands for flexible. We don't want to be so rigid that we can't respond appropriately. Some processes will inherently need flexibility. It's critical to understand that these two are not at odds. The inputs and process variables should be monitored and controlled so that the process output is consistent with customer specifications and repeatable time after time. Right, E, the second time, stands for efficient. We don't want any unnecessary activity or waste. The resources consumed and produced should be the minimum necessary to achieve the desired output. C stands for communicated. A process and any changes made to it are correctly communicated to all process stakeholders. Just as we said earlier, we don't want something stuck in a folder, gathering dust that folks don't know about, understand, or use. Last of all, T stands for transparent. So a good process should be transparent and measurable in that it's easy to determine the current performance so that if required, prompt corrective action can occur before it affects the customer. So to summarize, a good process should run like clockwork, be able to satisfy customers' needs at minimum effort and cost, time after time. So we mentioned mindset before and said that it's just as necessary as the nuts and bolts for a process model implementation. If you're looking to instill mindset and even impact your organizational culture, absolutely always starts with leadership behaviors. It's our daily routines and it's how we interact. So what kind of behaviors are you displaying as a leader? As we go through these, let me ask you to challenge yourself. Assess yourself against each of these and see how you fare. Which things do you find easier and which might be more of a challenge? So let's start in the middle, or appropriately the heart of the diagram. You'll see three slightly overlapping circles. Firstly, go see. This originates in some Japanese process improvement concepts. And the idea is there's no point relying on second-hand information or your perceptions, particularly if you're the manager. You need to get out there to the workplace. See for yourself where the work gets done. So go see the real place, look for real facts, and address real problems. Secondly, respect. Acknowledge that the process operators are the actual process experts. They hold the valuable information on the process. And understand the difference between a poorly performing process and the performance of the process operators. They're not the same, so make sure you target your energy accordingly. Thirdly, ask why. When you go and see a process, have a learner attitude. Ask why and identify the root causes of any problems. All right, moving to the outside and at the top, end-to-end results. Be aware of over-optimizing any part of a process by not taking an end-to-end view. If you're problem solving with your team, remember to ask about the overall impact. And that question is even more critical when considering the impact on areas outside your immediate accountability. Visible performance. So I already mentioned that what you can't see, you cannot measure. And what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So how do you make performance visible in your team? Do you have metrics for process performance and control somewhere that everyone can see? Coach for improvement. Do you help people learn by doing rather than just providing answers? Are you a teacher or a coach? Focus on the customer. We've mentioned customer before. So whether we have external or internal customers, and many people in functions, of course, largely have internal customers, it's those customers who are best placed to determine what is valuable or not within a process. Process steps that don't create any value for the customer are actually likely candidates for elimination. Are you and your team clear enough on your customers and what they place value on? Drive simplicity. Cannot stress enough, you need to keep it simple. Look for simple solutions that can be implemented quickly and learn by doing. The answer is definitely not always shiny new technology. So do you reward those who come to you with big scale solutions or those who make minor incremental improvements every day? What message do you send? And then lastly, improve continuously. Process models are not a one-time fix. That's the shortcut to those documents in a folder that no one ever looks at. Mindset and behaviours are critical for a properly functioning and value-creating process model. So how did you score? Where do you find challenges? Right, so now at last we're going to look at our 7 must-do items. And here are those 7 questions I talked about, which you can use to help you. So in a moment, we will look at process model. Is there a transparent process model with well-defined processes defined at the right level? Then we'll look at ownership. Does each process have a clear owner with authority and accountability within that process? After that, we'll look at data. Are the data definitions and data owners within the process well established? Then I'm going to hand over to Woon-Hui. She'll take us through performance, automation and controls, and she'll look at, is process performance well understood and cycles for improvement in place? Are the opportunities within the process for automation exploited? And have risk assessments been completed to ensure that the controls are fit for purpose? And then lastly, I'll talk about integration at enterprise level. Are the integration points between the processes understood and do they operate effectively? Okay, so what is a process model and what's the right level? Well, that does depend a lot on your organization, what you're wanting to achieve and where the benefits stem from. On the screen now, I have a typical process architecture, and we've used an example from the period end closing as an illustration. And apologies to those of us who might be joining who don't have finance backgrounds. Please just log a question in the Q&A if you want us to give an example from an area which you might be more familiar with. But the big question here is, how much do I really need and what's just bureaucracy? And unfortunately, the answer is a bit like how long is a piece of string? So that's not that helpful. So I'm going to try and give you some guiding principles. Are you thinking about a transactional process, and is it routine or non-routine? Well, a transactional process is much more likely to benefit from what we call level 7 process design, and that's not even shown on this diagram. But level 7 is what you might know as a work instruction or a standard operating procedure. It's a detailed instruction that will even include screenshots from your ERP transactions involved, for example. For a process which is less transactional or perhaps non-routine, level 5 is probably already detailed enough. Next, consider the scale of your organization. So, for example, do you have 2 people operating the process or 200 people? The bigger the organization that you have involved, the more critical it is to standardize activities. And that standardization will lead you towards more detailed design. Usually, not always, but I would say often. Talking of ERP, as we were a moment ago, that's actually often a driver. You will find it difficult without level 5 process design to do everything that you need to implement an ERP or similar technology. On the other hand, you could probably leverage the ERP documentation to create your work instructions, and you'll need that for training, let alone ongoing operations. And it's increasingly critical, depending on the size of your organization, the number of business units, and the degree of outsourcing or offshoring, and so on and so forth. Okay, so with this topic, process ownership, like most of what we're talking about today, we are just covering the tip of the iceberg. We could go into a lot more detail for each and every one of these, so please do get in touch if anyone is a specific area of interest for you. Critical to take away, though, about process ownership is that all 4 elements come into play, not just process. The role is somewhat different in operations compared to in design and implementation. In addition to the technical competencies in the process, data, systems, organization, and controls, process owner, especially in the early stages of transformation, will also be heavily involved in change management. A process owner, particularly at global level, will often be a critical player in telling the story of change, running agile programs to implement improvements, and leading a growing team of process, data, systems, and control experts. They're, at the end of the day, accountable for the process performance. They'll manage up, down, and across, and even still have to convince some stakeholders that managing the process end to end is essential. It's often a delicate balance between promoting innovation in one breath, while in the next, trying to halt needless investment in shiny but ineffective technology. Process owners will usually have to convince others that the intention is not to create some kind of process nirvana. Some people may even see process owners as an overhead and a challenge to other leaders' authority in the organization. Okay, data. Well, what makes it so important and why does it sit so firmly with process? Well, it's really because every step in the process uses data of one kind or another. And it's probably not news to anyone that data seems to be growing in importance now. Just think about data analytics and the role of data in remaining competitive. What kind of data are we actually talking about? Well, unstructured data. That's the kind of data that's in an email, in white papers, magazine articles, intranet portals, product specifications, and the like. Transactional data. That's data about business events, often related to system transactions, such as sales, deliveries, or invoices. They have historical significance, or they're needed for analysis by other systems. Transactional data are unit-level transactions that use master data entities. However, unlike master data, transactions are inherently temporal and instantaneous by nature. Metadata, well, that's data about other data. Maybe it resides in a formal repository, or it could be in various other forms, maybe like XML documents, report definitions, column descriptions in a database, or log files, connections and configuration files. Hierarchical data. Well, that stores the relationship between other data, and it might be stored as part of your accounting system or separately as descriptions of real-world relationships like your company organizational structure or maybe product lines. Reference data. That's a particular kind of master data, and it's used to categorize other data or used to relate data to information beyond the boundaries of the enterprise. Reference data can be shared across master or transactional data objects, and examples would be like countries, currencies, time zones, payment terms, that kind of thing. Now we finally come to master data. It's the core data within the enterprise that describes objects around which business is conducted. It typically changes infrequently and can include reference data which is necessary for operating your organization. Master data is not transactional in nature, but it does describe transactions. Well, that's what data is, but what does the data owner do? Well, they define the data and its creation, its relation to other data, they determine how it's configured in any technology, and they decide how it's coded. By that, I mean, is it alphanumeric? Is it sequential? Can meaning be assigned to those letters and numbers? For transactional data, the owner will set the parameters and ensure correct configuration in the system. The data owner is accountable for managing data, and there's a lot that comes under that. They control the read and write access, they set data standards, and they're responsible for maintaining the quality and the integrity of the data, just to name a few. Data is really a specialism in its own right, but if you do nothing else, know what types of data exist in your organization and which process owns which data. Right, glad I'm done with that one. This is not my favorite topic, I must say. But now I'm going to hand over to Woon-Hui. She's going to take us through process performance. So over to you, Woon-Hui.
Okay. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jennifer. So hi, everyone. Hope you guys are having fun still with us so far. So I'm going to cover a few of the topics that Jennifer mentioned, and I'm going to start off with process performance. So, well, the first question is how well do you think you know your processes? And how effectively can you actually identify what changes you need to make it even better? Only by managing process performance properly can you then confidently and positively answer these questions, I think. Doing it well means, you can focus on the right things, make informed decisions at all levels in your organization, and continue to improve. So to manage, process performance effectively, let's look at, the three elements that you have on your screen right now. First off, process measures. This is all about, understanding what measures or which measures are actually aligned to your business strategy. Because you need to understand which input or KPIs actually lead to an impact on your key business outcomes, because that's what you want, right? You want the right outcomes and by doing the right processes. And then analytics. So I know, this is a buzzword, everyone is talking about it, but it is really important to leverage on the right analytics, because then it gives you the right signals when you execute your processes or when you make any changes. Because remember, you can only improve if the signal is accurate and timely. And then process maturity. As your organization evolves, the business process framework and capabilities will actually need to mature as well. Yeah, because you can't stay stagnant, right? And having the right maturity model and doing the periodic assessment, organizations can then identify further capabilities to aspire to at the higher maturity levels. And then you can start to develop strategies and plans to grow these capabilities. So let me give you a couple of examples in terms of performance, but in regards to measurement and KPIs mainly. So I'm going to go back to my area, which is more order to cash. Yeah. So for example, you can actually look at what we call right first time KPI. And then if you look at the area of customer master data maintenance and sales order creation, I mean, this is actually quite important to get it really right first time, because if you have any problems or you don't do it right, this could mean delay in customer order, so your customer is not getting the products. And worst of all, you're not getting your payment in time because your invoice is incorrect in the first place. So your customer won't pay. Another example is OTIF, which stands for on time in full. And this actually, looks at your production and logistics processes mainly. The OTIF signal can help you identify which parts of your production and logistics processes that are lacking, or where just a minor tweak or improvement can actually lead to quite big positive impact. Right. So from there, let's move on to automation. So what is it? I guess in the most simple term, you can define it as the use of technology to perform daily and repetitive tasks. And how do you then identify what is suitable for automation? Yeah. So I think basically the areas that you should look for, or the processes that might be suitable, is those that have or require consistency, those that are repetitive, obviously, and those that actually needs to be really error-free and effective. And some of the typical process areas where you would have seen automation already is, for example, accounts payable, accounts receivable, so in the finance side, and then definitely in the sales order processing side, procurement, HR activities, and definitely in the manufacturing line. And then the opportunities and the benefits of automation is definitely multifold, right? I mean, we're talking about increased efficiency, better productivity and performance. I mean, these are really no-brainer. Deloitte actually did a survey some time back, and then they suggest that by applying what we call robotic process automation, it improves your business expectations or performance in areas like compliance, so up to 92% upside, quality accuracy about 90%, productivity 86%, and cost reduction around 89%. And then in terms of customer service, automation means better availability and a higher degree of reliability. I mean, that means happy customers. For example, if you implement a chatbot, it means your customer can actually have a 24/7 support around the clock, right? Now, in summary, then, with business process automation, one can actually ensure optimum resource utilization, and then you get the best and most profitable outcome, hopefully, if you do it right. A study by McKinsey in 2016. So yeah, it's a while back now, but I guess, the fundamentals are still correct. They say that 45% of current paid activities can actually be automated by the available technology at that point in time. And that means around $2 trillion in total annual wages. And that's at that time. So I suspect it's even higher now today. Right. So now let us actually look at some of the trends. And the trends here is, I hope, quite recent. So first off, hyper automation via machine learning and AI. I mean, this kind of technology or advancement actually means is opening the door to very complex workflows that you can automate. Yeah, and actually by harnessing this, we are actually getting better, obviously, return of investment on your on whatever you deploy in terms of your automation. No or low code integration. It actually means no or minimal use of IT to automate. And that means it allows non-developers, so like me, or I guess Jennifer as well, those of us that are not very IT specialists, to actually implement quickly without the need for technical skill or training. Robotic process automation here talks about actually the ability to then integrate very complex workflows and execute them for better in a better mode. In terms of end-to-end organization ability, so here we are actually looking at the collaboration and communication technologies that is available, because then it helps keeping the organization data in sync and in real time, so everyone can have access to the real truth. And then smart technology integration. So what it means here is, with smart technology, it actually acts as a bridge to facilitate digital transformation with your physical world. Yeah, an example here is voice-activated automation. The core principle behind this is, we are saying that we will implement voice command to promote better workflow efficiency in your workplace. So they are really, voice-activated automation is highly effective when it comes to connecting different platforms in the workplace. And finally, obviously we are in a global environment now. Businesses are all, going global. It does need a workforce that can function around the clock to support, the customers across different time zones. So more futuristic automation solutions will actually make the permanent shift to having more presence, I guess, because you'll see where AI bots and humans work together to operate a business that never sleeps. So, I gave a bit of examples here and there, but if you guys are more interested in the finance-related examples, do keep an eye out for our follow-up emails, because we will be sharing articles that actually cover more use cases in the finance area in more details. And finally, at least for me, risk. So there is really no getting away from, talking about risk when we talk about process. Yeah, a good process is actually one that we have assessed the inherent risk within the process, and then we build the controls, and then we assure, that it's right and clear accountability and transparency. So let's talk about them a bit more. In terms of risk assessment, identify where risks to compliance or goal could develop and materialize in your processes. Yeah, the more granular you do it, the more accurate, obviously, and useful the result is. Now, set your context typically around a sub process, like, you know, project, customer, vendor, or any other element that you might be interested in, and then try to combine them and aggregate them to an enterprise level. Then you see a more end-to-end picture of your risk. I mean, all operational activities in your organization occur within the defined business processes. And with any activities, there is bound to be risk, operational risk. So a proper mitigation approach will allow you to consistently identify those risks and design the right controls for it without impending growth or innovation in your company. Second point about building controls then. So where we look at this is we think, or we believe that risk management and internal controls need to partner closely with process owners, yeah, to build the control points into process steps. Because many times we actually see very much silos where you have enterprise risks fall under, let's say, the finance umbrella without any real involvement from process owners. And this actually brings us to the next point, which is accountability and transparency. Because it's one thing to identify a risk and design, you know, a process or design a control, but it is another to actually execute that mitigation or control. And to do so, you need transparency throughout the organization, you know, a way for departments to actually communicate, a way to assign those accountability properly. Hence, we see a very natural alignment between enterprise process modeling and enterprise risk management, because the integrated lens will actually lend a better appreciation of interdependencies, which could actually augment certain risks that you have in your organization. So with that, just to mention, in our team, obviously Knut is the guru when it comes to risk and controls. And the framework that you see here is actually something that, you know, he breathes and sleeps and whatever you call it. Yeah. So if this is an area that rocks your boat, do reach out to Knut. Sorry. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to share his thoughts. And then with that, over back to you, Jennifer.
All right. So last but not least, I'm going to talk about integration, which is a little bit of a follow-on, of course, from what Woon-Hui was just saying there. Integration, it's when you start to move out of your own silo of accountability. And what we've got on the screen now is a typical enterprise level process model. And we've made this really simple with the core processes of designing, building and selling widgets. Obviously, a real enterprise model would have the core processes of your organization at its core. But next to those core processes, you need to be clear on what the governing and what the enabling processes are. And you've probably heard of offer to cash, purchase to pay, record to report, other industry standard processes. And these all fit together on your enterprise process model, again, dependent on your specific organization. Right, so those were our 7 must-do items for process. The process model, process ownership, data, performance, automation, controls, and lastly, integration. And we want to leave you with three thoughts in closing. So firstly, it has to be alive. A process model which only exists on paper is of limited value. It needs to be up to date and frequently used by the process operators and in decision making. Secondly, and this one's related, it can't be static. For sure, implementing a process model is not a once-off exercise, and you need to have built-in mechanisms to continually evolve and improve in a well-managed structure, of course. And thirdly, process is a critical foundation for transformation. And here I mean both mindset and behaviours, as well as the nuts and bolts that we've discussed. I can't stress enough how many times I've seen that organisations take on, in particular, digital transformation with hardly a thought for the underlying processes. And that approach, in my view, is really a recipe for disaster. And by that, I mean implementations that aren't on time, they're not on budget, and they don't really deliver the anticipated outcomes. All right, well, thank you very much for your attention so far. I hope some of what we've said was thought-provoking, and you might have some questions now. So as a reminder, how to open the Q&A function, click on the icon there with the question marks, which is to the right of the leave button. So you might see me looking a little bit to the left, because that's where I can see the questions. I have a second screen here. Right. So I do have a question about automation and how that might work in practice. For example, something like month-end close. Well, so the automation that you're talking about, first and foremost, for a month-end close, let's say, is probably really robotic process automation, but even actually simpler than that. So what you're trying to do is use software that you can just capture and interpret the existing things that are going on, whether that could be through spreadsheets, maybe a workflow like in SharePoint, maybe with some integration into your ERP. So you want to make sure that you would at least have those things first. And in terms of the prerequisites, I would say, well, it's a little bit why we've talked about process today. You can't automate a process which is in itself not a great process or too error prone, because all you'll end up doing is automating and eventually coding up things which don't work very well in the first place. So really be clear what your process is and understand the dependencies, the task durations, and work out what each task is doing. And in a close, that is absolutely the case. The other thing you're going to want to think about is data, which is why you mentioned it. If you're automating something where you've still got a little bit messy data here and there, you'll find that whatever you automate will just stop. It will come to a halt because there's basically a data error. So, you know, something like cost allocation or depreciation in your close, if you've got poor quality master data, that's just going to halt every time. And you end up having to actually intervene manually and you don't really get anywhere. So getting some cleanup on your master data will help massively. And then the control points. So, I mean, when we talked a bit about controls, but things like steps that happen in Excel, be really clear what your controls around those are, or any reconciliation of accounts or that kind of thing. And you can get some real benefit by automating those controls, but the controls need to be good to start with. So that's a little bit about what you can do. But in terms of starting point, the very, very first thing you need to have is make sure that all of the process operators have that visibility of what's going on. You know what your performance is, and you can actually get after the issues in a kind of incremental way. But simple things like workflow and really clear and transparent spreadsheets with traffic lights so that the process can go on naturally and you don't need to run from one person to the next person in the department and say, hey, I've done that now you can run this program or whatever in the ERP. So I hope that gives a little bit of an answer on that one, but it's a topic that we do quite a bit on. So if it's something that's really of interest, don't hesitate to drop us a line and we can chat a bit further about it and maybe hear a bit what your organisation is doing and where you might be in the journey there. All right. Next question we have. Is there a key failure that you see time and time again when companies go alone with process change? That's a good question. So I think for me, and I'll invite the others if they have anything to add on that, but it's a little bit what I've said here and there about companies try and do it as kind of once off. We've done it, now it's implemented. And they go far too light on the change management, and certainly far too light on the mindset and the behaviors, because I really believe that a good process model isn't just about those nuts and bolts, like I've said, but it's really about the mindset and the behaviors, because otherwise it just becomes static and unused, and you get maybe a once-off improvement in things, but then you don't evolve, you don't get that continuous improvement that you really want from a process model. So taking the time to, and it is a bit of an investment, but really getting the leaders and team members on board with what's going to be different, in terms of expectations for them, in terms of their behaviors, whether that's about root cause analysis, whether that's about looking for those small daily incremental improvements, but particularly in my mind looking at process performance and what you get there. So that's, I don't know, Woon-Hui, if you've got anything you want to add on that one.
No, indeed, I think, I'm not sure there's one key failure. It's almost like what people say about when an accident in an airplane happens or whatever, is maybe a few small factors all coming together and becoming a big bang. So indeed, it's people's readiness, because a lot of time, the process people who look at the processes, even though it's good on paper, the change management side is not working well. So people do not understand the change and why they need to do certain change. So the traffic light is all nice, but on the ground, it's not, it's not what is reflected on your dashboard, for example. And then it's about also the ownership, because like it or not, changing a process in an organization will take time. And then you really need champion and people standing behind that to move the rest of the people along. And if you are not having the right champion or change agent to help with that, that's going to be a problem, because again, you need a signal from the ground. And like you say, Jennifer, it's about really measuring the right thing, because sometimes people get really excited and say, yeah, let's change this, and then put in all these different KPIs, but it's not really telling you the right story as well. So it's very dangerous. And finally, I say integration, because don't forget, sometimes one thing you change in one area, obviously it's going to impact the next area. So if it's not planned, the change is not planned properly or in the right sequence, sometimes you just end up spending a lot of time firefighting.
Yeah. Thanks, Woon-Hui. And I know we've got more questions, but I think we're getting kind of close to time, so we probably need to wrap up. So I'll maybe touch base with those who've asked questions that we didn't get time to answer offline. So thanks for your questions and for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. We certainly have, and we'd love to stay in touch. If you're not already connected to us on LinkedIn, please do send us a connection request, and you can also follow Loughridge Transformations on LinkedIn, and that way you'll stay up to date with our blogs, our webinars, and other content that we share. Our next webinar is scheduled for the 3rd of March, and I'm delighted to share that we will have a guest speaker joining us next time. I'll be joined by Tushar Bellapurkar, and together we'll be exploring data science for finance transformation. So that's a fascinating area, and there'll be plenty of gold nuggets to take away from that conversation, and it naturally builds on some of the things we've touched on today, of course. You can register for that session at loughridgetransformations.com. Otherwise, you can also send us an email, and we've got links there if you want to schedule a catch up with us. And please don't hesitate to do that. If there's anything we've said today that has piqued your interest and you want to explore a bit further. We've introduced our 7 must-dos for process today, and if you want to learn more about our methodologies or our ways of working, we are more than happy to talk. And if you're considering a process model deployment or even a complete transformation, or you've got one where you feel you haven't really got the return you were expecting, we can perhaps talk about where we could work with you to bring our expertise to bear. So, last but not least, we do have quite an active blog at Loughridge Transformations, and we've included some links here to a few blogs which you might find interesting. Please do keep your eyes open for some follow-up emails from us. They'll have the recording link, a quick survey, and some further information. And if you don't see anything in your inbox, do remember to check your spam folder. And we really appreciate if you do have a moment to complete the survey. Webinars are still quite new for us at Loughridge Transformations, so that feedback really helps us improve for next time. And with that, I wish you all that you stay healthy and safe. Thank you again for your time today, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thanks and goodbye.